Hi, this is Comptroller Brooke Lierman welcoming you to the Maryland Association of Counties Conduit Street Podcast, the show that discusses the issues and ideas shaping Maryland policy and politics today.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Canale here, joined by Michael Sanderson. Michael, tying up some loose ends on another great summer conference. How are you feeling being back in town?
I feel tired, kind of a little exhausted still. We're recording a few days later and still kind of licking wounds and so forth. But I don't know. It's a weird thing because I'm physically tired after the conference, but weirdly, like emotionally, I get charged up by the conference. Our members are so engaged, and we got so much feedback from county people and from other stakeholders and from vendors, exhibitors, speakers. I don't know. It's like a high energy window. So I don't know. It's a weird mix of feeling tired and revved up. Are you in kind of the same boat?
I think that's a great way to put it. I share your sentiments exactly. Exhausted, but still fired up and ready to get back into things, back into session. A little bit of a lull now, but a lot of work's going to happen between now and then. And I think the conference was the perfect springboard for a lot of that activity to happen.
Yeah, exactly right.
So for today's podcast, we want to bring you a segment from the summer conference in case you couldn't be there for whatever reason. And hang on 1 second. I have some audio right here.
Okay, then. All right. That's not exactly the main course for today, right? That's not the main track. That's just a little sideshow.
Well, hold on. What is that I'm hearing in the background there?
Okay, well, most importantly, the band, they're the Classics. That's with a K and an X. We'll link to their site in the show notes. They were great. They performed at the MACo Crab Feast, as always, and they actually let me get up and sing one with them, which may have been a lapse of judgment on their part, but I had a really good time.
Definitely a lapse of judgment on their part. But if you know Michael Sanderson, if you've been around Annapolis, or really anywhere in Maryland, you know that he likes to sing if he's in the right setting and the mood strikes him. So Classics, for those who don't know, now you do. I can't look at Classics, Michael, without thinking of Kleenex. I don't know if that's a weird sidebar or whatever, but yeah.
I like it. So anyway, more seriously for our podcast listeners, at the conference, we try and feature a lot of different conversations and discussions about issues of the day, things that are facing counties, our challenges, and things that we're working on. And for this conference, we put together a pretty good one-on-one interview with Comptroller Brooke Lierman. She's the Maryland State Comptroller. She's been on the podcast before as a guest following one of the reports that she and her staff had put together. And she came and joined us for a pretty wide-ranging conversation. We had a packed room audience on Saturday morning. That's a testament unto itself. But I thought that conversation was really good and thought it was worth sharing with our listeners here.
Right. You certainly got into some timely issues, both on taxes and revenues, but then also into some deeper issues like population changes, housing affordability, short-term rentals. All of that stuff is really on point. So with that set up, here's the recording from Summer MACo with Michael interviewing Comptroller Brooke Lierman.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. Thank you all for being part of our summer conference over the last number of days. I know it's difficult to take time and spend time together with colleagues, make these kind of connections, come to the beach. Such a sacrifice all made. We appreciate that, recognize it, but our organization and our elected leaders gain so much out of the exchanges that we can have together at an event like this. So thank you all to start things off this morning. I'm Michael Sanderson. I'm the director here at the Maryland Association of Counties, and I was speaking with Madam Comptroller and saying everybody who does conferences, you get good at the vanilla sort of template of, oh, here's a big room, here's an interesting topic, let's put 3 or 4 people at the front of the room, we'll get a beautiful moderator, and we'll save some time for questions. So then you get like 8 minutes of somebody's best ideas, and then you cut them off because other people need to speak. wanted to have a few extra flavors, and we've tried to create a lane for a one-on-one where we could dive a little deeper and talk a little more thoroughly about some things that are interesting. And to do so, all you need is the right kind of guest and the right kind of time. So engaging in just a little bit of flattery. Comptroller Brooke Lierman, Madam Comptroller has been an ally for our organization in her time in this role, in her time in the legislature. She has been a veteran of these conferences dating back to even prior to being elected and serving, wanted to be engaged and understanding that this was a place to build on some of that engagement. As a lead into our conversation, I will offer particular thanks that as she was entering office after winning the election for comptroller, go through a transition team process and so forth, nobody would have batted an eye if there had been no mention at all of local government in the transition team process for the office of comptroller. But instead, she doubled down and said, I want to make sure I work with local leaders, hear about your issues back in the community, and get engagement. Actually, I see a number of you in the room this morning who are part of that transition team and gave guidance and thoughts about how your office can be transparent and helpful, both for our governments, but also for our communities. And that degree of engagement and interest is really, really welcome. You wanted to be here with us today, and we're delighted to have you in this forum. Welcome, Madam Comptroller.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. It is great to be here. It's a real honor and a pleasure to make it to the Saturday morning slot. You know, but I'm so happy to be here. And you're right, Michael. I mean, I previously was a state delegate, but as somebody who's, a Marylander, I recognize the importance of all different levels of government. And we are all serving the same people, but I have always thought of our local government officials really as the tip of the spear. And so if we are doing the best job that we can, at every level of government needs to be partnering with one another. And so when we started talking about the transition team process, I thought, well, of course, I have to figure out, how we can be better partners with our local government officers so that we can serve Marylanders better, because that's the point, right? That's why we all got into this. So I appreciate it. Appreciate the partnership, and it's great to be here with all of you. Thanks.
Terrific setup for the conversation, and at least that instinct, we're universal top to bottom, not any names, but just as a practical matter, if you say it as if it's common sense, and I wish it were top to bottom, but love that spirit of leadership. So most of our audience today are nuts and bolts folks that understand structured government and so forth, but let's go ahead and do a few pleasantries up front. The Office of the Comptroller, you're a revenue collector, but there's a station on beyond that. So you give us little ABCs of
Sure.
what you do.
And the revenue refunder too. My favorite question, and the question I am asked most often around the state is, of course, what on earth is a comptroller? And I'm always excited to let folks know. In fact, if you go to our website, marylandcomptroller.gov, we even put together a video on what is the Maryland Comptroller. I like to think of the goal of three key parts. First and foremost, this is the elected CFO of the state of Maryland, right? See every dollar in, every dollar out. And we keep in mind and remember that is your money and my money, right? That is Marylanders' money, and making sure that we're being really cognizant of that, thinking about what our revenue estimates are and fulfilling that role as sort of chief economist for the state, that single source of truth on our revenues. Second, I'm your voice. I'm the independent voice, financial voice on many government boards across the state. So, of course, you all know the Board of Public Works. There's the State Retirement and Pension System Board. And then if you give me 3 or 4 letters, I will turn it into an acronym for a board that I am on. But I am that independent voice with the fiscal knowledge, voting and speaking up. And then third, of course, I am the state's revenue administrator. You may call me the tax collector. I like to think of it as the tax refunder. So there too, making sure that we are always centering fairness, that we are modernizing and making it easier to comply, and that we are being forthright in everything that we do. So that is the Office of a Comptroller in a nutshell. When I was elected, we adopted a new vision to work in partnership to create a state that's more equitable, more resilient, and more prosperous, so that every Marylander can reach their full potential. And that begins with partnership, which is why I'm here.
So I don't envy your moment when you served the alphabet soup and you have flashbacks of having meetings and agendas and so forth.
They're all interesting, though. They're all interesting. Yeah.
So it's an important leg of the school to represent on those different things. So I think one takeaway is this bill is more than arithmetic. I mean, it would be easy to think, okay, this is a green high shade call where watching numbers in and watching numbers out and managing Lightspeed funds and things like that. But the duty is broader than that. It's more than that. We're thinking about the priorities on behalf of ZPIN, taxpayers, and so forth. So seems like there's a good deal of ground that we can cover. Maybe the easiest top line to think about. We put it in the title and so, but we want to talk about more than just the budget of the moment and the fiscal situation of the moment. But we do have to talk about that. So what are your thoughts about just budget process for this year? With the General Assembly, Governor working together on a plan for the revenue structure and what we do with spending, managing different sets of funds and so forth. More challenging than usual, a big number of $3 billion numbers that might catcher.
Yep.
So where do we sit today, sort of from your standpoint? What are your thoughts looking?
Sure. So yeah, I'll start with the very beginning of your question. This is not a role for a team count, right? Green eye shade or bean counter, whatever you want to call it. I think it's really essential that every Maryland comptroller is thinking about how to build, a state where we can all thrive, where businesses can grow, and is not thinking in 4-year segments, but is thinking about 40 years from now, what the state will look like and how we will be doing better, even better than for our kids and our grandkids. And that means making sure that we're not just balancing the books, which we are doing, but also to think about what those books look like in coming years. So, quick example, we created a policy research division. And that research division is now publishing reports for the first time ever on how our economy works, sometimes how it's not working as well as it should, on what's impeding labor force participation, right? Why aren't both parents getting back to work? Well, let's look at our childcare system. It's also talking about in-migration, out-migration, the importance of immigrants to Maryland's economy. And we'll be publishing a report on housing. So all of these different topics are really important because those facts are necessary not just for us to know, but for all of you to know, right? And for our General Assembly to have at hand, for our governor and his team to have at hand as well, and our business leaders too. So there's, that kind of work. There's the fraud detection work that I want to brag number one in the state on. If your refund is delayed a couple of weeks, it may be because it was randomly picked for a fraud detection check, right? And we should I think that's a good thing. So we want to make sure that we're doing that work. So it's, you often see our Bureau of Revenue estimates and the work that they do. They meet 3 times a year, 3 times a year publicly as a board. But there's always work being done on the inside as we're monitoring and thinking and reviewing and advising. And that leads me to, of course, the budget process, because the budget process starts with the Board of Revenue Estimates. We make it really fun by having BRE mean 2 things, both the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, which is the division in my agency, and the Board of Revenue Estimates, which is me, the treasurer, the secretary of PBM, and the director of the Bureau. When we meet and talk and adopt our official revenue estimates. The next meeting we'll have is in September. And then December is right before the budget comes out. So those revenue estimates drive what we believe we can spend as a state. Those are our economic predictions for what's to come. And those predictions are based on what we are bringing in, right? We're following the trends. So every month I'm seeing what's coming in for income taxes, what's coming in for corporate income taxes, where we are on sales taxes. We're looking at withholding numbers. I mean, our companies are filing, there's 1099. So we're seeing all of that come in on a regular basis before we do those predictions. We're also doing a lot of talking with businesses. When I first became comptroller and in subsequent meetings, I've met several times with leaders of the Fed, at the Federal Reserve. And they indicated to me, one of the things that they do a lot to understand what's working and not in the economy is they talk to people. I know this is shocking. They have regular interactions with business leaders and say, are you hiring? Like, how is your bottom line? Like, what are your plans for investing in infrastructure in your business? Where are you on these things? So we are doing that too. Also, for the very first time in the history of the agency, actually doing roundtable discussions with industry leaders so we can better understand what's coming and what's happening on the ground to help complement the quantitative research and work that we're doing. So, all of those, that all comes together in our revenue estimate. The governor and the General Assembly and the Secretary of PBM use that revenue estimate. We also, of course, have our capital debt affordability committee meetings and to determine the amount of capital debt that we believe we can carry over the next years, which I know is so relevant for local governments as well. But that work is really happening all the time, even though you just see it every once in a while. But there have been important discussions about the structure of our revenue overall.
Sure.
And every state structures its revenue slightly differently. Often I am asked to do reports comparing our state taxes with other state taxes, and it's not a fair comparison because you have so many different levels of taxes and fees in every state, whether it's county or municipal. We even divide up our states in different ways. Some folks don't do anything. Some states do nothing at the county level, right? I don't know. Do they even have a MACo? I know. And others don't. So, but it really is we do need to think about our revenue structure and whether it's meeting our needs, and will continue to meet our needs while creating opportunities for increased affordability over the long term.
On that point, the continual attention to the revenue structure, and part of that is driven by the changes in what moves the Maryland economy.
Yeah.
On the decades-long, back to that 40-year vision instead of a 4-year vision, that the things that are moving and growing and driving Maryland's economy today is a different story than in the 1970s or the 1930s. And if you don't accommodate and recognize and reflect that, you end up with a distortion and potentially missing opportunities.
Yeah.
It's a wise thing to do. The idea that we're looking at that stuff could sound like, well, if we've turned ourselves into a mess, but
No,
practical.
you guys just be looking at it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a healthy way to be.
Yeah.
So when we left our fiscal heroes back in April, putting together the state's fiscal plan, the big asterisk was.
It was a tough session.
Right. It was, right? So, but as we serialize the story a little bit, we knew that federal fiscal action was coming. And we know in large part because of geography and for other factors, Maryland is uniquely positioned to have the exaggerated effect in our local economy and with employers who are here and so forth. So is it too soon to see how big of an effect that has been? I'm sure your staff is working on this, but as you try to dig in on this, it has to be on your mind.
Yeah. Oh, no. I think about what's happening at the federal government most of the day for many reasons. So, let's talk a little bit about the federal government and its impact on Maryland. Understanding in January that a lot was to come. They pretty instantly set up DOGE and the Department of Government Efficiency and, started making very big moves very quickly. We realized that in order to plot a course forward, we needed to know where we were starting from. And we didn't have that data. And so we went out and we partnered with the University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business, so that we could combine their data with our data to produce a report to give us a starting point. That report came out in the spring. It's and it is a report all about the impact of the federal government on Maryland's economy. The top line number, if you haven't read the report, $150 billion a year. That's, $27 billion in wages, millions in retirement income, $45 billion in contracts, billions in direct payments, and grants, as well. There's grants and then there's direct payments. Grants like, the brick crane to Chrisfield that was plugged back. Grants like the ones that we apply for flooding in Western Maryland from FEMA, right? All of those are those types of grants plus direct payments, foster care, Medicaid, et cetera. So all of that added up before this administration to about $150 billion a year. That we needed to have so that we could start understanding what it would mean for counties and the state as we started seeing cuts. And of course, I think for many people, what's happening to the federal government when we hear about, cuts to FEMA or NOAA or the Park Service or NIH, it feels like an existential crisis. But in Maryland, it's deeply personal, right? Like these are our neighbors and our family members and our friends. And then in the third level is that it also affects our economy, right? It's going to affect our revenues at the state level. And it's going to affect your revenues, many of you in counties, at the local level. So we have 230,000 Marylanders who are employed by the federal government. 160,000 federal jobs in the state of Maryland. Our largest government declares Fort Meade, right? There's 17 military installations, I believe, dozens and dozens and dozens of agencies. And the folks who work at these jobs, these are good paying jobs, right? The federal government has driven our wage growth in the state of Maryland. So if we don't understand the impact of the federal government on our local economies and our state economy, then we can't understand how our economy is functioning. So we took that time to take a step back and understand where we were. The next thing we're doing is scenario planning. So we're putting out reports shortly on several different scenarios. What if this happened at the federal government? How would that ricochet across our economy? I'm not even going to say trickle because these are changes that will ricochet. BRAC, Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. USDA noted that they want to close it, which makes me really sad. It's beautiful and amazing. In addition to doing really important research, I used to drive by it every day when I was at the Federal Law Clerk in Greenbelt. We are sending a comment to USDA protesting that and using the data that we have to show how many jobs in Montgomery County, how many jobs in Prince George's County, what the effect on revenues that would be, how many people depend on this. And we are able to do that because we started doing this research. And we want to be able to share all of that with you too. So we will have a public tool available that you, county CFOs, local CFOs, whoever, can go in and play around with to see the effects of different items as well. So that's, because we want to be transparent and make sure. And this is just one tool and it's just one data point, but it's an important data point that we understand moving forward. So if you don't have it, I'm holding this because I wanted to show this one pager from our 100+ page reports. But encourage you to grab one, check it out, check out the report at marylandcomptroller.gov and send us your questions and ideas on things we should be looking into too. Because we are going to have to pivot. Texas used to be all oil and gas. Now they're one of the leading producers of renewable energy, right? And it's just important that we think about what our future economy looks like too. One that isn't quite as dependent on the federal government, given, we've lost 13,000 jobs just this year from the federal government. And that doesn't even count nonprofits for the USAID funds. So it's a lot.
So a lot of moving parts that are a level or two beneath just doing the report, crunching the numbers. There's a couple things that you mentioned that I wanted to double click on and get into a little bit. I know your office put together a report. You joined an episode of our podcast to dig into a report on migration and sort of the economic effects of new Marylanders. For this audience, can you sort of outline that and talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's important to take a step back when we think about migration. Since the agricultural revolution, basically, folks have been across the country have been moving from lower productivity, lower income parts of the nation to higher productivity, higher income parts of the nation, right? It was just like, move to the big city, get your start, or move to a higher income area, get your start, make your dreams happen. And the truth is that we've just started seeing that shift dramatically across the nation. Those are not the migration patterns of the leader of this first half of the 21st century. So folks are now, and this may be something that in 2070 somebody writes a big story about how the internet changed migration patterns, whatever it is. But now people are moving to lower cost of living areas, right? They cannot afford even the lowest challenges in the higher income areas. So folks are moving from higher income areas or higher cost of living areas to lower cost of living areas. And Maryland's caught up in that national trend. I think, Brian, don't quote me on these dates, but I think from 2013 to 2022, we lost about 8,000 residents a year to domestic outmigration. That doesn't mean we lost 8,000 residents a year total, because we are the benefactor of having so many amazing international immigrants come to Maryland. There are scientists at NIH and up and down the 270 corridor. There are manufacturing CEOs and directors. They're in the healthcare sector are immigrants. So they're across the economy, but they have offset that domestic outmigration. But when we think about domestic outmigration, I think we also have to remember that people vote with their feet, right? And if things aren't working here for folks, we have to figure out why that is, what it is, and make sure that we can attract residents here, keep them, and especially as our birth rates decline. Okay, we have an aging population in America, and we have an aging population in Maryland, and our live birth rate is not making up for our death rate, right? So these two factors, domestic outmigration and an aging population, are causing migratory challenges and population challenges for the state of Maryland. And I think in my mind, we have to focus on affordability. Like, we have to focus on building a more affordable state so that we can welcome people here and keep people here, and they can thrive and build a hope and retire.
So let's dig in on the idea of affordability. That's got multiple components.
Yep.
You mentioned your office is starting to look into housing,
Yep.
and that's certainly a driver and major element of affordability in this state, but also in the American economy writ large, and even broader than that.
Yeah.
So I know you already mentioned the number of county leaders who get input, and from a lot of different stakeholders. But walk us through what you're looking into on that front. I know we anticipate have a big report coming soon, and we love having little teasers and early findings and things like that. So where are we going?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, housing is the number one source of the cost of living anywhere, right? And when we started doing research for our State of the Economy report, we went in and we'd ask the question of these business leaders at roundtables all over the state. So, what's keeping up, and what's your number one concern? They're meeting with the comptroller, who's the tax collector. I mean, they'd say, like, this tax or that tax, I mean, to a roundtable, the number one concern that every business leader's roundtable brought up was the cost of housing. And I was not prepared for that. I don't think my team was surprised as well. but it really led us to start digging into the research on cost of living and housing. And of course, doing this in partnership with the Department of Housing and Community Development, which just released its second affordable housing needs assessment, which is an important and excellent report. So housing costs have skyrocketed across most of the nation. In fact, I think we, in 2022, built 6% fewer homes than we did in 1999. Housing starts, I should say. Which, given, when an economic situation is working, when things are rising in price, and there is increased demand, then what you learn at Econ 101 as well, supply will meet that demand, and there will be more building. Well, that is not what's happened in America, and that is not what has happened in Maryland. And so today you find that the median home price is $450,000. Only 49% of median income Marylanders could afford that, down from 75% several years ago. So we have a housing crisis in the state of Maryland, and we therefore need to look at what is happening here, but also understand what's happening in our surrounding counties and our surrounding states. If you look at, so what we are looking at in our report is the housing starts and some of the regs in other states where they are building more quickly, because the place that has built the most housing in the past 20 years is in the Southeast, right? It's where people from Maryland are migrating for a lower cost of living. It's the Carolinas, it's Virginia, it's just because they have been building more. And so it's really important for us to understand what they're doing, the rate at which they're doing it, so that we understand what we are competing with, right? And where we need to do better. And then, I try very hard to stay in my lane, at least sometimes, on these reports, to make sure that we are presenting data, but not prescribing policy. I respect my former colleagues in the General Assembly and the governor and all you local elected officials. You are policymakers. You are policymakers. And so we want to provide you the data and make sure that you have that so that you can then do policy prescriptions from that. So it's like, when you go to the doctor, and, you take the temperature and the doctor makes the call, even though the PA or the medic comes in before. So we're excited to provide all of this data to folks to take a look at and think about the cumulative effect of the regulations that we have created over the past 20 years. Each of those regulations has a very specific purpose and was passed in good faith to meet a need or a concern. But altogether, they have caused challenges and blockages in our housing supply. And so now it's a matter of figuring out what we want to prioritize and how we want to do that to make space for Marylanders and to make space, frankly, folks, for future Marylanders, people who want to move here and live here with us. We've got a great state. I'm eager to share it. And I want to make sure that we're doing that and working on that together.
That's been a closing observation I think is really interesting. I think over the long term, public policy frequently has a pendulum effect. And we may have been in a direction saying, let's control and let's contain and let's go. Maryland has been a leader for a long time on smart growth policies in particular. And a big mantra there has always been, let's try and emphasize and focus development where we have the proper infrastructure, where you've got the pipes and the roads and the seats in the schools and so forth. And that's generally steered us in a productive direction.
Yeah.
We've also done other things along the way that housing is principally driven by market forces more than government forces. We can work around the edges on housing policy and try and help with financing, help accelerate things that we want to see happen and so forth. It feels like the pendulum here is moving with not just with you, but with other leaders in Maryland and nationwide, because we're all in. So there's an interest rate shock. There's a number of different forces that have made things challenging.
Let me interrupt you for one second, because I think it's a really good point about the infrastructure and the roads, because there's this very cruel irony here where we need to build more roads and update our schools and build a new Thomas Jefferson Bridge and we need more sewage capacity in MACo and water and clean hands. And so, but we need an increased tax base to pay for that, right? But we can't build the housing until we have the infrastructure. So we get into this catch-22, and there's this really cruel irony there. But we can't be static, right? As local leaders, you all have to make these really tough decisions that sometimes require some courage, because some people are going to like them and some people aren't. But we have to move forward and figure out how to do that so that we can make space for folks, do it in a smart way, and build for the future.
So with this room and this audience, there's an opportunity to plant some seeds. This seems like a great venue. As you've been thinking about some of these things from a revenue structure point of view, but from the moving parts in Maryland's economy and in our neighborhoods, we've got folks here from jurisdictions across the state who are interested in coming back home, good ideas of things that they can do next. Do you have any use of wide open opportunity to engage in a little bit of that?
Yeah.
Let's look at this. Let's try that.
Sure. No, appreciate that. And I'll touch back on a couple other measures of affordability. So there's the housing. I also want to give a shout out on childcare. We produced a report on childcare last year. And I think it's also important to think in your counties about what you're doing on childcare. I was just started reading a report recently about childcare across the United States. And the quote that I remember was that the place where there's sort of, I think it was the highest sort of two parent engaged or kids in childcare, so both parents could be engaged in the workforce. The highest place was in a county in one of the Carolinas that is next to a military base, because the military provides free childcare, right? I mean, it was like this, I was like, oh my God, direct correlation between affordable, high quality childcare access and the ability of both parents to work, right? You know what it was? It was birth rate. They have the highest birth rate in the nation because people understand that it is so expensive to have children. But in that county, they know, we have access to this childcare. In Maryland, the average cost of center-based childcare is $20,000, right? And you get that's more expensive than College Park, right? And you get 18 years to save for College Park. Maybe you get 6 months to save for childcare, right? So, women, ladies, so I think, it's just really important to think about what we're doing to make it easier to have and raise a family while also staying in the workforce in Maryland. So there's childcare. Also, you are so engaged in transportation challenges. Transit can eat up costs for families. Having to pay for a car, gas is not going down, I mean, these are real expenses in Maryland. And so it's really incumbent on us to make sure we are funding that transportation trust fund and providing options for Marylanders. That's another thing that goes towards affordability in Maryland. So, I just wanted to throw out a couple other things, because when you're thinking about how do we build an affordable state, there's a lot of things that go to that bucket. And that's a good thing, because it gives us lots of options on places to work in and dig in. Yeah.
But on this idea of what is government's business and what isn't, this may be a circumstance where the stay in your lane philosophy doesn't hold on all the way. Yeah. If you're not thinking about issues like childcare, right, or not thinking about the development of your housing, the housing stock in and around your communities. You think about it when you do your comprehensive plan, you think about a particular development and so forth. If you're not thinking that long-term view about those things, those are the green lights for your community to be able to grow. especially in ways where you wanted to, and where you can support it. And so
I totally think Louis Goldstein thought about child care costs all the time. No. Rest in peace. God bless you all real good. Look, you're right. And I think we do have to be thinking big, and you have to think big about affordability and the picture, but then there's lots of little things along the way that you can do towards that. One of the things that we were hearing both from local government officials in our discussions on housing and from developers, for-profit and nonprofit developers, was the unpredictability that exists in Maryland. That there were so many layers to get through, that they can't get investment because they're having they're having more challenges getting investment in Maryland than in other states because there were too many places along the way where it could fail. And so if you can lower the unpredictability, and you then make it easier for investors are more sure that this is actually going to get built and it's actually going to come to fruition, then you, in some ways, you even lower the cost of building the housing. You lower the cost of building housing altogether because you can bring the money in more easily. Right now, investors are taking into account that unpredictability and making it more expensive to mold, right? So anything we can do, even just on let's, make sure we're providing assurances, working together. And I will say, this is not just local government. This is local government and state government, right? It's making sure that we're thinking about, okay, there's the local processes and permitting and zoning and whatnot to get through. But then there's also, maybe MALF, right? Is this in a BSC? Making sure you say that this is going to get through, it's check off the box at MALF, which is a board that I'm on, that I see, that it's going to get, some financing from DHCD. And we know, because we worked with DHCD, that if we do X or Y, they are going to give them financing, right? Creating sort of partnerships and more certain paths along the way for some of these projects is important. And I think that has to be done at the local and state level. And I think local leaders, that you can help drive that you can say, you can come up with a model and say, hey, I'm going to reach out to DHCD and the governor's office. We want to come up with this model around, this is an area that we really can build in, right? We can accommodate, if it's townhouses and MACs, we can make it work here. Or it's a dispersed project, but it's a type of project, right? It's a type of housing that we want to have throughout our jurisdiction. We are going to work with the governor's team or DHCD or others to come up with a way so that we can fast track X or Y, or get assurances from different boards that they'll have to go through that this meets the needs that they have, right? So I think we have to be thoughtful and creative at the same time about how to create those pathways, like we've been doing on TOD, right? So the General Assembly's passed legislation really incentivizing transit-oriented development, TOD. And thinking about, how you can capitalize on those types of projects. And is there something about that's working well for that model that you could translate to a different type as well? Yeah.
I'm just nerdy enough to be amused by government cliches and euphemisms and so forth. And I want to make this term happen. I love the term green tape. I've heard it used from time to time as the reverse of red tape that gets everything slowed down and snarl.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. We already have a way to open the path.
Exactly. But a broadcast, there's a green light process will concierge you through from start to finish because we want this to happen. Yeah. A way to signal it and make it forward on your website and what you do with economic development and so forth can be part of that, having the longer term vision, think about affordability and successes and so forth. Yeah. Okay, we've got an audience here who may have some questions for you. So are you game to take a few from the field? Questions. Let's do that. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, just identify yourself. So, Kent County Economic Tourism Development. The legislation that scares people are lodging short-term rental tax. Mm-hmm. What have the conversations done at the comptroller's office, and does that include identification and some kind of enforcement to make sure that everybody that's doing short-term renting are paying your fair share?
Great question. So this year, the General Assembly passed legislation, for those of you who don't know, to start centralizing the collection of taxes for short-term rentals, sort of centralizing that regulation. It is pushed off a year, so it does not go into effect this year. We just didn't have the capacity to do that at the same time we were doing the tech tax. And it honestly, it needs a longer on-ramp because there are so many questions from all the different local governments about what it's going to look like. So I'll be honest, we haven't started those conversations, but we are, and we will be having conversations with MACo and MML and bring local folks in to talk about how we're going to structure it, what it will look like. We have, we've talked in the past with Airbnb and VRBO. We've looked at the legislation in Tennessee and other places where it already exists. There are probably a couple cleanup things that we'd like to do this year that we'll talk with the sponsors about. But we care very much about making sure that everybody pays their fair share and then it gets back to you. So that will be our central driving force to make sure that all the taxes are collected and then they are remitted to the appropriate place, and that we're accounting for that along the way. One other thing I'll throw out there that has to do with this, but is actually totally different, is we have engaged, I think we're the first state in the country to engage with an entity to scrape publicly available data through VRBO, Airbnb, to look at what folks are making and then compare that to what they're reporting their income as to us. So if I see that you have at 10, Ocean City rentals that are rented at $500 a night, 9 months of the year, and I don't see that on your tax return, right? So we are excited about this partnership, but look, that's great for the state, but it's also great for the locals because that is money that will then, that person lives in your county, that money will then flow back to you. This is part of our new initiative to help us shrink and close the tax gap in Maryland, right? The amount of what people owe versus what they are paying in taxes. One other focus of we have lots of different things within that we're doing to try to close the tax gap. Another one is misclassification of workers. We are seeing too many people misclassified as 1099s when they should be W-2s. And that's unfair to the employers who are doing it the right way, and it's unfair to those workers. And so we've gotten great relationships with our unions who are calling in violations that they see. You can also do that. We have information on our website about how to report it so that we can go investigate it. But these are all our new initiatives to close the tax gap, to create a more fairer system for everybody. Thanks. Sorry, that was a huge tangent, but thank you. Good question.
But connected back to an issue we mentioned earlier about how the actual economy is evolving and changing.
Right.
And you can't just take the ground rules from 1975 and think that they're all going to work just fine in 2025. You just got too many leaks doing it that way. So be smart and stay on top of it and see what's happening. Right way to it. Years ago, Airbnb didn't exist. Their market capitalization right now is bigger than tiny little companies you've heard of. Hyatt, Marriott, Hilton. Airbnb doesn't own a single property. They're bigger than all of them. Yeah. Fine.
When you first got elected, like you had St. Mary's County, when you first got elected, you visited our county, you talked about a changing of your software system to speed up the revenue reimbursements to counties. How's that work?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. It's working. It's coming. I didn't know that I was becoming a tech executive when I became a comptroller, but here we are. So I am happy to say that in 4 years, we will have modernized 5 major IT systems in the office of the comptroller. I challenge you to find any other state agency that has moved that rapidly in the last 20 years. We've launched our new website that has for the very first time a customer relationship management system behind it, of CRM. We've moved our business tax system from the old COBOL system to a new system, Maryland Tax Connect. This fall, we'll be launching a brand new unclaimed property system, where we will actually even be able to proactively send people their unclaimed property if we already know who you are. So you won't, when you like, I love them when folks were like, oh, I have unclaimed property coming, and then they find out it's like a $7 refund check they had picked up from CVS, right? No more will you have to file for that all the time. Like if we already have you verified in our system, we'll just send it to you proactively. Don't worry, we'll still do the big newspaper, it's in state law. And we are also now moving our central payroll system to Workday. It will start for half the agencies this January 1st, for the second half of the agencies next June 30th. And then finally, the final system that will come in is our personal income tax and PTEs. Our personal tax collection system will move into an entirely new system. We're working on it obviously now at the end of next summer. For our tax systems, we can only migrate systems between June and September. So, because if we do, October is a big tax season, believe it or not, and then January starts tax season, January to May. So we have a tiny window every year where we can migrate our personal tax system. And we weren't going to it didn't make sense for us to do it this year. It would have been too high risk with the tech tax change and everything. So it will be happening next summer. So we're getting there. And I'm excited that we'll be able to do it in 4 years. And then, after that, we'll finish our FEMAS migration. I don't know if people know what FEMAS is. Okay, FEMAS is, I like to talk about the Comptroller's office as the backbone of state government. You never see us, but we're building all together. And FEMAS is that system. It is the state's financial management system. Every grant you get, every grant a nonprofit gets, every payment that goes to a vendor or contractor, all of the balancing, this all happens through the financial management information system, FEMAS, which is also in full automated. So we are one of the last states in the nation, but we are migrating that system over the next few years as well, which will provide an incredible amount of data and information that we will be able to translate to have great data dashboards on our website to show money in, money out. Sorry, I'm nerding out now, but really excited about this increased level of transparency you all will be able to see in the next few years after FEMAS migrates. Thank you for that question.
I like the stories coming back in wartime when we could find folks who could speak Navajo and use it as the wind talkers to help us in the war and so forth. Like finding people who could still program COBOL. Good response from the That's who we are. Another question for Madam Comptroller, right here.
So we talked earlier about the housing costs, and I was wondering, when you're looking at the data, have you also been looking at the data for revitalization efforts? As you mentioned, there's an increase in cost for bringing in roads, bringing in the infrastructure, and I know Baltimore City did a lot of that in recent years. I'm wondering if that data, how that compares to new builds.
Yeah. It's a really important question, and thanks for clarifying that. Yes, we are looking, the house goes from vacant to being able to be occupied, or if a house goes from a single house to a duplex or a triplex, then we will be including that data in the report, because that's also a really important part. I mean, we're lucky to be a historic, we have so many historic assets in the state, including some historic housing, much of which, needs to be revitalized. And we have a great tax credit, the historic revitalization tax credit, which is a really important opportunity for Maryland and has a great ROI. And so, yeah, that's a big piece of what we'll be doing.
Okay, we got time for one last question back here in the center.
Max Gross, I'm with the Anne Arundel County Association of Realtors, but full disclosure, I was the debt service analyst for DBM for 6 years. So this might be a little nerdy. But you talked about we need tax base to get infrastructure, we need infrastructure to get housing, we need housing to grow. And it seems like the only way out of that is borrowing. I know for a fact, because it was my job, that we were borrowing significantly less than we had capacity for up through 2022. But now, obviously, the borrowing environment is much worse. So I was wondering what the, if there is still capacity to address some of those things, jumpstarting the infrastructure with doubling the capital budget, for instance.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we had a great bond sale in June, and there were a lot of skeptics after Moody's, but it went great. We had banks buying our debt that had never made an offer before. So so there is certainly an appetite still for Maryland debts. There is a recognition that we pay our debts, no matter our bond rating. So it is a good question. I mean, I think there's always sort of balancing how much you want to pay in debt service, because of course our state property taxes do not cover our debt service anymore, not even close. So I think you have to balance how much the budget secretary and the governor and general assembly have to balance how much they want to be spending in debt service versus what they want to be using for programmatic and operating needs. And so it's actually a policy question. We could do that, but that we would not be spending that money on other things. So it is an important question. We're about to we do this little reports, little research papers just on how we spend our capital money. We did one on transit last summer. We did one on climate costs. We did one on schools. And I think it behooves us to, given the need for school construction funding, for instance, versus what we have available, it behooves us to start thinking more creatively and a little more radically about how we need those needs going forward, because otherwise we won't make any headway. So yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that I think about a lot. I think it's probably one that Secretary Brady thinks about too. But at the end of the day, it's a policy question on how the General Assembly and government wants to go.
So friends, thanks very much for taking some time to join us for the session this morning. Please join me in thanking Comptroller.